Pamela Ann Burkhalter is joining me from Zurich, Switzerland, where she is an international leadership coach, and she is also a master practitioner and trainer in logosynthesis. She has been very active in the international logosynthesis community, and she's been sharing her expertise and also training practitioners in logosynthesis. So thank you, Pamela Ann. I'm always interested in learning how people were first introduced to logosynthesis and what inspired them to train in the model. So, can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, synchronicity. I don't believe in coincidences. So I actually met Willem many years ago in a mediation training. And years afterwards, because I love learning new approaches, I was on the lookout for something new, for a new approach. And within the same week, logosynthesis came up 3 times through an email, through somebody mentioning it. And I'm like, I always listen out for signs like that because I know when that does happen, it's like I say, not a coincidence. So I thought, okay, I'll sign up for what was back then just was Logosynthesis 1, 2, and 3. Wasn't what it is now. So I signed up for the first one, and I ended up staying for the whole week for the summer academy. It was just sucked me in.
That seems to happen to people.
Yes, and I've stayed with it ever since. This was 2008. Yeah, and I'm someone who really, I'm more of a generalist. I love breadth, and I have tried out so many things, but this is one of the very few things I've really, really stuck with. It just keeps not just growing on me, but it just keeps growing. You get deeper, and Willem keeps developing it. I'm so appreciative of that. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And so, as an international leadership coach, can you maybe describe your work with clients and some of the themes of your work?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, it's really hard to pin it down, because it's so broad. And it's not so when I work with people, first of all, as a coach, because I work in different capacities. I work as a leadership coach one-on-one, and then I work with teams and organizations. And so logosynthesis is still more of a one-on-one. We have looked at teams as well, but it's more of a one-on-one approach for now. And I don't go in saying, hey, I do logosynthesis, because unfortunately it's still not a household name yet. I'm sure it will be one day, but it isn't yet, right? So, but what I do say, and this is always important to me because I see every single person and it's independent of their status as whole people. And so the contracting for me is always that, I have a holistic approach and that I work with them as whole people, which means that in the discovery and the intake, I want to know about who they are as people. I do not believe you come into the workplace with half of yourself and leave the other half at home. There's a tendency to wear a mask at work still these days, but underneath that, it's still the whole person, right? So the way it slips in, so to speak, and I'm not really answering your question right away in terms of the topic, but it's the reason I bring that up is because when I work with people and they come up and they show up in sessions with me as whole people, they bring in everything. Because who they are shows up in the workplace and it can get in their way. And so the themes they bring up can be relationships in terms of work relationships, toxic managers, peers, but also personal relationships where they get stuck, to the imposter syndrome, and because I work with senior management, there's still a tendency for many of them to be males. Um, and because of the history of men and what they've grown up with, they tend to, and I really, I'm not, I try not to generalize, but there is this tendency of being more disconnected from their emotions. So there's this need to reconnect with many aspects. So it really is, it's such a wide range. So it is work relationships, but it's also topics like burnout or close to burnout because people are so driven, and especially, and this is not because of Corona, it was pre-Corona, but even more so now, 24/7, and how to manage that and the stress of the workplace. So it's just, and that's why I love logosynthesis. It's just so broad. It just anything that shows up in terms of limiting beliefs, which I know you've also talked about with I think Harriet, right? And it's just so broad. So it's a really hard question to answer. It just, wherever it shows up, it shows up. But I let them know that I have a different approach in addressing these things if they're open to it. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of times, if we go into a workplace and management wants to deal with the issues at work, right? And so it's like, give me a solve for these specific issues. And if we approach it just from what is actually happening at work without recognize what people are reacting to and responding to, we're kind of missing, if we're just kind of treating the symptoms as opposed to resolving the triggers, it makes a big difference, right? Because we keep coming back in these patterns, and a lot of times we think we've resolved it, and it just keeps showing up again and again. And I think the point you make about, we don't want to generalize men versus women, but men and women have been conditioned differently in their upbringing, and that reflects in their management styles. And I think there's a big piece that both men and women can learn in kind of learning to resolve some of those old beliefs so that we can make room for working together, right? Like, so that
Yeah.
we can all thrive together. Do you
Yeah.
see a lot of gender differences in the workplace when you're coaching people?
Yeah, that's just this last week, there's topics around unconscious biases coming up, which is very real. And I think one of the things that, because of my training in logosynthesis, what I inadvertently began to look for is what's behind. And what I've trained in a lot is in the past too with other approaches, we tend to get stuck at the cognitive level. And something like unconscious bias, which it's not just gender, it's whole diversity. And me being someone who's mixed with mixed culture, know that our backgrounds, our culture really, really influence us. Is that it allows us as practitioners of logosynthesis to look beyond and to address it at a level which is not just cognitive. So, which means it's not just because one of the things I've been also, seeing a lot in LinkedIn and literature is the unconscious bias training doesn't really work. You walk out of a training, which is so classical, and you're hyped up, you get it, you go back to work, and within weeks you're back to pattern. You revert back to pattern. And one of the beauties of logosynthesis is it's sustainable. Um, so, so does gender show up? Yes, and in all its forms. I don't focus so much on the gender, but if I do, actually, it's because I've always been a part of the women's movement in terms of supporting women. That's a no-brainer for me. What I am actually putting more and more out there is that if we overly polarize the gender piece, we're just ending up back into, women against and fighting for. And I actually believe there's so many men out there who are in touch with their emotions and they're not getting enough appreciation. And the fact is, a lot of the men that I do work with, the ones who are stuck and maybe are toxic or show up as toxic managers or micromanagers or whatever it is, without wanting to overlabel, is they have their stories, like you were saying before. And so I'm actually putting out there, let's be compassionate with these guys in a way, right? Because they are acting up a certain way acting a certain way for a certain reason. And so I see a lot of times of my job as building a strong working alliance with those who actually have not spent very much time reflecting on why they are the way they are. And this does obviously include women as well, because a lot of the
Most of the people who get to the top push themselves so hard, whether it's a man or a woman, whatever the reason, it's they push themselves so hard. And why do they push themselves so hard? And then those stories, right? Yeah.
And the belief that they have to keep pushing themselves so hard, right? And that's one of the things that, really came through for me working in the corporate environment, is that everybody believes that they're doing the right thing, that they're doing what they have to do for their job. And, I've seen VPs get upset because people weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and their reactions ended up creating, toxic conditions or stressful conditions for people to work in, but yet they were doing what they believed was called on them to do. And a lot, what I love about logosynthesis, it's not that the belief is wrong, it's just we've got so much energy built up in it that it derails us. So those be strong drivers and hurry up and get things done, like those things that helped us to be successful,
Right.
can get in the
Right.
way. And so um, it's not that we have to change the belief, it's if we can get things flowing so that we're not stuck in these patterns all the time.
Mm, 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 mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when people run into. So as a leadership coach, there are a lot of 360s, or it's my job to offer feedback from what I see or observations. And when I work with teams as well, we deal with issues like conflict, et cetera, right? Um, and it's, I think part of my job is just to simply offer awareness, or spark awareness, because if people don't even, like I say, don't even reflect, because they're not geared to reflect, because they've been pushing themselves so hard, like we said, they actually, and the world gets faster and faster all the time, so there's like there's no space to actually breathe and think about things. So part of what I do is to offer this oasis for reflection as individuals, as teams. And there is this phenomenon, and it is true, the higher you go, the more lonely it is. And I'm going to come back to that point, by the way, of this whole pyramid thing, because there's a movement towards self-organization and co-leadership and co-ownership, the whole agile, the teal, which requires a certain kind of mindset in someone who calls themselves a leader. So I prefer to talk about leadership versus being a leader, because I truly believe there's a leader in each of us, right? And it sounds very cliche, but it's not. Um, so the awareness building takes time, and with that comes psychological safety. And so there's the one-on-one container of safety, so that people can begin to explore for themselves. And if they're at the top, there is this phenomenon of being, whom do I trust for real feedback? Who's giving me real feedback, and who's giving me feedback because they want something from me? you know and so I'm a neutral person, so I get to, there's the trust building. I have no agenda, and that's, I think most coaches have that, advantage. And so when I work one-on-one, but also when I work with team, one of the key features is safety, creating safety. And there's this whole, also literature around psychological safety and how important that is. And how this connects with logosynthesis for me is because I love this quote by Bill O'Brien. He was the former CEO of Hanover Insurance. Um, and it's one that's quoted by Otto Scharmer, who's the author of Theory U, that the success of the intervener depends on the interior condition of the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener, which means that the place you're coming from will define the impact of how you show up and how you influence others. And this, for me, is the key around logosynthesis, because if you haven't done your homework and you're in a leadership position and your interior condition is stressed, or it's out of kilter for whatever reason, or you're, there's a lot of talk around narcissism. If you look at the ego and the elbowing that
goes on in organizations, because that's my playing field, that if the intervention as someone in as a team manager, or for me as holding space for others, but the higher you climb in an organization, the more you're actually an intervener. And so if you haven't done your homework, you're impacting a whole lot of people around you. And I'm really surprised sometimes how little awareness there is around this in terms of, how you show up impacts others. And that's where I think people start to lose sight when they see an org chart instead of people in front of them.
Exactly. Well, and I think a little bit that's where the culture of the organization comes into play, doesn't it? Because when everybody in the organization is behaving that way, and that is the norm, right? So you, especially in, highly dynamic organizations where there's a lot of change and a lot of transition and it's fast paced and you got to be moving fast, and that's how we as a society think, right? Like you got to work harder, you got to go faster, you got to do more.
Right.
And we reward those behaviors and we think that that is what we need. And yet when I think of leadership now, I kind of, from a logosynthesis perspective, it's bringing that sense of calm so that others can show up and actually contribute. Because when the leaders are all, pumping out and asking for more, it does create a stressed organization, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's why I, always go back to this individual. It's like it always begins from within, and within, also professionally and personal. We always forget about the personal side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And all you need to do is look around, and we go, there's just this more, right? When is it enough at the end of the day? And so it's not just individuals, like, how much, it's not even about money, but about ambition. How high, how much more do you want to go in terms of your career? How many houses do you need to own to be happy? The whole question of happiness. And then of course, the classical midlife crisis, where people start to look for, well, hang on a moment. I have people coming to me who have, and this is the thing with coaching, it started to shift. Continental Europe's always been slower than the Anglo-Saxon parts of the world in terms of coaching. So there was, for the longest time, coaching is considered, and is still partially considered, as deficit coaching. In other words, people come to you, or they're asked to come to you, or there's this idea that they've got a problem, therefore they need to be fixed, versus potential coaching, right? And so I work primarily with potential coaching, but there's always something to look at. It's both ways. There's the beauty and the imperfection and the perfection in us. And so, where was I going with that thought? There's this idea that it's just never enough, and so people climb the ladder, and then they hit a point where they're like, even younger people, like, I've achieved my goal already, now what? And then there's still this emptiness inside, because it's like, exactly, the material doesn't fulfill us. And I think this last 1.5 years, Corona has shown us that it's like, wow, we can actually do without a lot of things in our lives. So there's the individual more and more and more, but then organizations too. It's like, when is enough enough? So I'm very, very choosy about clients I work with these days, and really going down the road of, the sustainability, regenerative systems, because we can't afford. So this is why I work at organizational level as well as beyond, because we can't afford to we're just this whole idea of exploitation, and that we are superior to others, is one of the key drivers, I think, of discrimination, whether it's gender or any other form of discrimination. And if we look beyond that and see each other as human beings, then we're just all the same. We are just human beings, full stop. Right. And I think that for me is the ultimate. And I think that's where logosynthesis brings us back to, who are we? Who am I really? And when I'm really in connection with who I am, my purpose, but also in true connection with something much bigger than who I am, the definition of leadership starts to shift.
Yeah.
And sorry, yeah.
Yeah. No, and I was just going to say,
I
as
get
you were
very
saying that,
passionate.
I don't mean to interrupt, but as you were
No, no.
saying that, I was thinking, like for leaders, one of the biggest things is to have an appreciation of why the people that are on your team are responding as they do. And for me, having this model with an understanding of how intense people can feel discrimination and the different backgrounds that we bring into an organization, how that can impact us at work. Because I, for me and my background, I guess I was oblivious, to some of my responses as to how another person might, because I was going with my belief system, which was different than, and my past experiences, which were different than the way a lot of people operated. And so I think logosynthesis gives us a great model to do our own work. And it also gives us a great model to understand the humans that we work with, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I look at myself, I wouldn't, I couldn't be a trainer. And in fact, I didn't, actually choicefully, how shall I put it? I didn't actually set out to become a trainer in logosynthesis because I'm not very good at copy pasting and just regurgitating material that somebody else has developed. That's not me. So, but I'm here as I show up as a trainer and I teach these days because I can see and I love all the interviews that you're running, Kathy. I think it's just absolutely amazing job you're doing, by the way, really, because you're really helping bring across just all the interviews that you're running around, from trauma to health to limiting beliefs to right across the board. And it's nearly this idea, and sometimes I find that's what makes it so hard nearly to bring across, is that it's nearly too good to be true. People are like, okay, that can't be right. It's just, and so the only way you can understand logosynthesis is to have experienced it, which is why I run these Q&A sessions to let people get a taste of it. Because once you do, it's so hard to explain, right? Once you do experience it yourself and you notice the physical, it's visceral in its impact, then it's like, oh, okay. And then on top of it, the sustainability. I've, had clients coming back to me this week. They're like, I tested because it felt so good at the end of I felt so neutral. I wasn't reacting to this other person, this person in my memory, this toxic manager. And literally, this happened very recently. That's why this comes up as an example. Is no longer, I don't react anymore. I'm like, after they test it because they're like, it's nearly too, yeah. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
beautiful, and
That,
my own experience has been exactly that. That's why I stick with it, because it's like, wow, I've worked on myself. That's a split. I've done a lot of work and personal work, and it's sustainable. I am not the same person I was 5, 6, 8 years ago, and it gets easier and easier over time. I don't think the work ever stops, right? But I want to come back quickly to that piece around what you were saying about how we impact others in culture of organizations, and this movement towards self-organization that's happening, even in larger organizations, because it's harder to imagine how it can work in larger organizations, but I do see subcultures. And so there's this the agile, the teal movement, which Frederick Laloux brought with him with his amazing book, Reinventing Organizations. So no, I don't have a commission from him to say this. It's something that really is very worth reading if one hasn't read it, and the ideas around it. And there's a structural piece to it, but there's also the whole idea around the leadership. In order for that to be possible, to no longer, and I the way I phrase this is no longer be like the pyramid. So if you look at most org charts, they're pyramids, right? There's one at the top, and then
And sometimes I think this very idea, and we see this in government systems. So, when I say organizations, I don't just mean corporates. We see this everywhere. Most places we look at, you've got this one person at the top, and then you've got the leadership team, da, 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 da. And yes, you have the board of directors, etc. But it's so focused on one person. And I really sometimes think it's actually unfair. How on earth can one person, it's no wonder that people are under such huge pressure and that all these changes happen to these people when they climb up the top, because there's so much pressure, so many expectations. And actually what's happening is this triangle shifting towards the circle, so that it's no longer just the top down. This whole idea of top down obviously comes from that idea, right? And I guess that's the evolution of humankind, or maybe I should say mankind going into humankind. To circle, which is why I'm so active also in the art of hosting community, because circle is, we're sitting in a circle, which doesn't mean we can't make decisions. I think there's this idea that when you're in a circle, then there's no decision making, and there's always about consensus, and that's not true, because you still need to have someone guiding the process versus guiding the content. So this whole idea too around leadership, people get to places in leadership because they've been experts, but it doesn't mean they're good at leading people. And that's a typical topic as well that I work with, right? How do you shift gear from managing through expertise to managing from I don't know the content and working with people? That requires a whole different, not just skill set, but mindset. And so from triangle or pyramid to circle also requires a different mindset. So this shift into self-organization and agile, the structures might be in place, but for leadership, and servant leadership is one of these terms that comes up, doesn't just happen overnight, because you first need to let go of this concept of power in the traditional form. And letting go, as you and I know, is a nice idea, but so hard to do. And again, this is where I see logosynthesis doing, it's amazing, because then you actually really look at what is it that I'm holding on to so tightly? Where's that energy bound? Where's the fear of losing power, losing, what am I losing? And that fear of losing, people don't talk about, which is, also why I think Brene Brown is another name that comes up for me, has become such a big topic, vulnerability, because it's so hard to show vulnerability, and because it's seen as a weakness and not a strength. And so so I'm going a little bit all over the place, Kathy. I did tell you that talking with me, it gets very messy.
I love listening to you. I love listening to it, because I'm so engaged in this topic, and it's such an important topic, right? And I could chirp in with lots, but I'm just enjoying I'm thinking it in.
We could talk for hours and days. No, I'm so passionate about all these things, and I connect all these dots. So sometimes I can go really off on a tangent, but I think I know where I do want to go. And it's so this whole movement I'm seeing where people are getting stuck with this co-creation and agile leadership is it's not easy to shift gear from a top down to I am part of the self-organized piece and letting go. And that part, I think, is one of the keys which still needs to happen, because it's a nice idea, but to implement it, and I do believe that's the way of the future, bit by bit. It's a long process. I mean, if we look around the world and everything that's going on, yes, I don't think I'm going to be alive to see.
But you're doing a great job in facilitating it and bringing different schools of thought and different models together and implementing them together, because to me, that's a little bit what logosynthesis offers, is that ability to take the beliefs and those past practices that are so ingrained in our way of being, so those unconscious biases that we first of all don't recognize, but even when we recognize it, we end up repeating it over and over again because it's in our programming. But when we can use logosynthesis to resolve those underlying energetic structures that keep us
Mm,
stuck in those patterns, right? Because
mm,
that's
mm.
a piece of survival, that we end up doing things automatically and don't have to think about it. But it does get in the way of thriving, because as the world changes and we have to do something different, meanwhile we're stuck in those old frozen patterns. And that's something, even with young people coming into an organization, they see it differently than the people that have been there for a long
Yep.
time. And so, it can be harder for someone that's been there for a while to shift gears. But again, logosynthesis can, you just start from, what am I reacting to, what's bothering me, and start to take away those triggers so that you can, kind of let your energy flow in the organization, right? And one of the big pieces, I think, when you talk about moving to circle from the pyramid,
Mm,
is that need to control, is we need trust, and we need boundaries. So people have to be clear on what's expected of them so that they can feel safe, and they also have to trust that the repercussions are not going to be detrimental to them, and that they can make mistakes. And again, this is somewhere where you see it with logosynthesis all the time, right? If someone's feeling agitated or concerned about, some aspect of their work, you can help them get to that space where they feel comfortable and confident. And it's such a beautiful resource to help people, through those transitions, I guess. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and trust is a huge word, right? It really is.
Yeah.
At so many levels, and so one of my big words is uh, connection. And when you're really in full connection with who you are, and flow, also using, you mentioned flow too, and all this ties up together, because when you're really in connection with who you are, and that includes owning not only your gifts, because some people struggle to own their gifts, right? And others struggle to own their weaknesses. But when you own all of that and say, well, that is who I am, which doesn't mean not doing anything about it. So there's this idea that acceptance means passiveness, but yeah, you know what I mean. Resignation is not true at all. It's about accepting and looking at, making conscious choices around. So what do I do with this? But that the trust begins with um, trusting. When I know who I am, then I'm more centered. And so I trust that I know what I have to do. And if I don't know, I trust that I'll find out, or I'll trust I have the right people around me. And that's why this quote around the success of any intervention being dependent on the interior condition. Because if I come from a trusting place, then I'll also not just have trust within, I'll trust others. And then comes the psychological safety. Um, and then that has been, if we want to talk research, I'm very experience based, so I'm not a researcher at all, but there's so much research around psychological safety and trust and all of that. It has to do with being able to voice one's vulnerability. And you can only do that if you have a certain centeredness, right? And you also trust that others aren't going to exploit it. So there's so many pieces. And I think one of the things with logosynthesis, which really helps, is people start to recognize drama in terms of others' dramas and their own dramas, and to separate that. And so when they're reacting, like you say, or they're triggered, they start to recognize as well more, when I work with people, they start to recognize, well, actually, it's not mine, it's somebody else's. So you can't say, he or she made me feel, because they can do something to which I react, but ultimately I can choose how I react, which is in many cases easier said than done. But that's what's amazed me with logosynthesis. It really does allow that to happen.
Yeah. If that
And
person isn't bothering you anymore, right?
yeah,
And the power of it is because a lot of times, we're looking to the organization to give us a safe place to work, and we're looking to the organization that we're demanding a lot of or that we require a lot of, but when we can do our own personal work, and it doesn't matter where we are in the organization, right? We all have the ability to do our own personal work. And if I can feel grounded and centered and trusting inside, like in my internal being, then I can show up at work and it doesn't matter so much what is going on. And people feed off of that. So if I come into work and I'm stressed out and, I'm
Exactly.
agitated, people feed off of that as well, right? And so, an organization is made up of individuals, and so the more individuals that take charge of their doing their personal work and having the model that allows them to heal some of those past experiences and to develop from those past experiences is really powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like I said before, I think oftentimes people aren't even necessarily aware that first of all, that they show up a certain way until they get feedback. And then sometimes you've got people who will fight the feedback because they
Yeah,
don't,
'cause the feedback's
like
wrong.
to hear it like this. Yeah. And then, but if you take it on board and you are doing some introspection and are guided through it gently and clearly, then you recognize that oftentimes it's because of something that's happened in the past. And I'm not a therapist, but stories, we're all shaped by our histories, everything that we've experienced and gone through. And sometimes it's really amazing when you start to look at, people's stories with them, which is what we do also in leadership development programs these days. Oftentimes, is people start to share their stories because we invite them to in order to for them to first of all think about it, and then they start to realize and connect the dots. Well, oh, okay, that's why I'm reacting to this person, because what they're actually triggering in me has to do with something in the past. Never thought about it that way. And it's really amazing what comes up when you start to work one-on-one with people, right? Yes, And then the other thing you were saying too is exactly that. It doesn't matter who you are in the organization. When you show up in a place where the more you've cleaned up or done your deep cleansing or whatever we want to call it, the more peaceful you can show up, the more compassionate and empathic you can be, and the more empowering. We talk about empowerment so much in organizations, but it's cognitive, or it's oftentimes too often people feel like it's a buzzword. Excuse me. And it's not really lived because of that fear of I might lose control, like you say. But when you're in that place of no, I done your homework, then you don't have that fear of loss of control anymore. There's that trust that you speak about, and then it really becomes empowering. So I just find it fascinating sometimes, all these beautiful corporate buzzwords in the meantime. I can't help but always go into where's the energy bound and what's really going on, because they're like bingo, they've become bingo. It's like, oh yeah, we got that one. Okay, next, but are you really, really living it? Right? And it is. It's all the individuals added up together. One of my the teams, one of the teams I've been working with, I was brought in to offer some conflict training, and I don't like to do classical corporate conflict training these days, so I do it my own way. But the main conclusion was conflict happens, or the place to begin is with myself, and that's I think it's so anything to do with relationship, anything to do with delegation, or difficulty to delegate. I mean, everything any issue one has, where if you run into an issue at the end of the day, I feel like I'm doing a mantra here, but everything begins within.
It just really
Yeah.
is. The place to look at is, there's a reason that Gandhi's quote, it gets quoted again and again, that the change begins, change we want to see. And we need to be the change that we want to see, because that is just simply so true. Yeah.
If I can just kind of notice what I'm reacting to and resolve what's triggering that, then I can show up and actually focus on my work. And I just noticing that transformation. And I mean, I've had years of personal development and read tons of books and tried tons of techniques, but there was nothing that, because everything was kind of at a cognitive level, I
Mhm.
knew what I should do,
Right.
but my belief was different. And beliefs are energy structures. And that's what logosynthesis works with, is those energy structures. And so then you can start, you can really start to see real change. And we could also see what other people were reacting to. And, there was even physical symptoms that people were displaying because of their reactions to what was going on. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of potential there, and it doesn't have to be so difficult. So a piece of it is awareness of what is possible. And certainly what you've shared has helped to increase our awareness. And then the other piece is having the interest and to do our own work, because that isn't always a comfortable thought, right? Especially if we're not
Mm,
programmed that way. So, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And maybe one last, well, I don't know last, but I am aware of. But anyway, so yeah, a piece that we haven't talked about, or we use the word culture in the context of of organizational culture, but we're also so programmed because of our heritage in terms of
Yes.
our, so I'm of Swiss and Chinese culture, and that's also in logosynthesis terms, there's so much energy bound in those, and the very strong principles which come, for example, with the Confucian culture, right? And the drivers behind that, of the work ethics, you've got to give face to not only yourself but the people around you, and all these, working hard and all of that, the whole, you've got to be number one, and all these drivers that push us, um, they are, and this is the beauty with logosynthesis, when I work with people, is we can actually even work with these cultural fields which otherwise feel very intangible. We know they're there, we're aware of it, most of us, in terms of, yeah, it's because of my background, but the logosynthesis allows us to even address that. And I love it when people walk away. The word that I think I hear the most often is neutral, or the sense of detachment, but not in a cold way, in a healthy, I like to call it healthy detachment. So when people have identified and allowed themselves to go play, to look at, so what's going on for me, and what's really triggering me, the source of, um, so we don't explicitly look for triggers, we look at what they're reacting to, right? And it's my job to then identify and help people identify, what it is that's actually the source of the reactions, whether it's this anxiety of losing power or control, whatever it is. um, and these things show up, whether it's beliefs or old stories, and sometimes it's the culture. The what we were taught. I mean, I know for myself that I was taught um, to smile, or to give face, to be number one. I mean, I was brought up in Hong Kong in school, where we had homework in kindergarten. It's not got any better in the meantime. I think it's got worse.
Mm.
Push, 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 push. And if you grow up with that, then you end up pushing yourself, and then you push others, with no mercy whatsoever, and all of that. And so when you start to do that, resolving of that, and it neutralizes, and you have more awareness, and you're more in flow, and things start to happen of their own accord, and you're just more at peace. and then you show up more peacefully and people around you. So the results in terms of what I see with people I work with is they're more in connection with who they are. They're more in connection, including the men, with their emotions, their vulnerabilities. They're like, they own it more, generally speaking, and it's nearly a sense of making peace with what is instead of fighting it. And so they show up in a much more connected way, and relationships start to shift. And most of my clients come to me at the corporate, from corporates, and what they come back telling me is, oh, the relationships at home have gotten better, because again, we work with people as a whole, and so it just impacts all parts of our lives. Relationships with their kids shift. They're more able to be present as a whole person. They're more able to deal with stress. And like you said before, if you show up with stress, um, you are going to cause stress to others. So this whole cascading, and then coming back to the cultural piece, you start to you don't we tend to, with the DNA, right? Then, and we've got generations and generations of behind us, right? And it actually allows us to reduce the the stress that we pass on. I don't have kids, but but literally,
Yeah,
I see that
I can vouch for
shifting.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and the big piece is that there's so much focus on diverse work environments, and to try to work in a diverse work environment, and we all, because it's very efficient to work when everybody thinks the same, right? So I grew up in a large family. We farmed, and everybody knew what had to be done. We could kind of do things without even talking to each other because everybody knew what had to be done and did it. But then you go into a work environment and you need some sort of flow and efficiency in order to get through your day. And it's wonderful to bring in diverse ideas and diverse backgrounds and diverse cultures, but it's not always comfortable because people aren't doing things the way you do them, or the way you believe they should be done. And so again, it's another area where I notice what I was reacting to, and just kind of resolve those underlying triggers and be more peaceful, and it just allows more flow and more ease, and for myself and for other people, right? And I think if we try to approach it cognitively, I don't see how we get there. But from this energetic level, where you can actually resolve those perceptions that trigger such intense responses, it's beautiful. It really, it really is. Yeah.
It is, yeah. And I think one thing we haven't maybe uh, said, and I think is so important when we talk about leadership too, is people look towards leaders or leadership, who are role models at the end of the day. People leave organizations because of managers is one of the number one reasons, right? And so I think in my past, the when I was working in the corporate, was many years ago, but if I look at my clients too, those where people feel like they're most respected are those who are reflective. And this does not mean at all that they can't be energetic or charismatic or visionary, but they have a certain humility, and and they're not just running ahead of the crowd with a flag and then looking. They're not even looking back to see who's following them, or it's not the ones who are using the whip, but it's the ones who bring people on board, and 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 everybody in their unique way. That's the other thing. I think everybody
Mhm.
is absolutely unique. It's like you were saying, we're all individuals at the end of the day. It doesn't matter where you sit in an organization or the organization chart. But the ones, and if we look at literature, that increasing literature, there's so much, I don't know if the right word is demand, but recognition of the fact that it's all about people. There's this drive towards human-centric leadership, right? And that's because we're people. I really don't know how this term FTE and head count, I think those have been such labels that, language defines how we think, right? Or it's kind of this cyclical effect. And there's vocabulary we're using which we don't think about. So I think this increasing awareness comes with reflection in people who are open to doing self-work are more likely to be able to hold the space to allow others to really grow, and to hold space for the organizations to grow in a respectful way of, and I'll go even further than that because I'm so passionate about it, is is how we are not only with each other but with the planet and everything. So this whole centered, this place we come from, is just so essential. We want to build a better world, and I think so many of us are talking about it. Just no, Kathy, I'm going to go on and on here because it's like it's
Yeah.
it's it's world peace we're talking about.
Yeah.
I truly believe it. I wish the leadership in organizations. I mean, for me, leadership is everywhere, everywhere, and I so wish those who were really in places of the highest influence, they would really look within and do self work. And I think it would make huge shifts for this whole planet. This
And I think
is.
that's where, each of us has an opportunity to learn and to do our own work. And because, as Willem always says, we are essence, each of us is essence, and things block us and get in the way. And unfortunately, we have a lot of world leaders that have made it to those positions based on fear and based on, pain and suffering. And, how do we make the world a safer place that we can put leaders in place that are connected with their true essence, and create a space of safety for those that they lead. And I think, where does it start? I guess it starts with each of us. That's what I've always been told. It seems like a lot of work, but if it starts with each of us, then a piece of it is sharing what is possible. And to me, logosynthesis offers such a beautiful model to heal the past and to develop leaders for the future. And yeah. Well, so any last message for Pamela?
Seriously?
Yeah. I know we have, there's still a lot of things I'd like to talk to you about, but I'm thinking we should wrap up soon.
Yeah. No, I don't know. It's like there's so much, and there's feels like we've covered so much already. No, I don't know. It's like I think maybe to pick up on the last thing you just said. Sometimes I think it can feel a little bit frustrating, because it feels like it's taking so long. So it's like, work one-on-one, but it's just precious. So every single bit, I think, of the work we're doing, the one-on-one work, it's so incredibly gratifying, and all the lives we touch, and it does become a bit of a snowball effect. That's why I do try and reach people who are in places of influence and begin with them. It's not, it's wherever I can sow the seeds, and um, and it is, that's how change happens with every little bit. I think it's so true. It sounds so cliche again, but every grain of sand is part of the whole beach, or every drop of water makes up the whole ocean. Um, yeah, there's this beautiful quote by William Blake, which I can't remember, but it begins with grain of the world in a grain of sand, or something like that. Anyway, I can't remember it right now, but it's one of those that it's like, it's so true. There's eternity in one's palm. We're holding it, and I think we should each do our bit. If we each did our bit, this world would be a little bit better, and that's what counts. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing your bit, and for all your expertise and training and everything, to sharing your knowledge. And it's certainly sparks lots of ideas and lots of interest. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for listening. Thank you for all the work you're doing.
Always.
Surely you're such a huge ambassador for logosynthesis. Thank you.
It's a great topic to share. So thank you.